So if you break your arm, the X-ray gives you a clean, jagged white line. Broken or not broken.
Right. It is very binary.
Yeah, and it is a comforting image, I mean, because the problem is visible and the solution is pretty obvious. But what happens when an entire society feels fundamentally broken and there is no diagnostic machine to show you where the fracture is? Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are looking at an 18th century survival guide for operating in the middle of complete societal and spiritual chaos.
It is quite the document.
It really is. It is a text by Jonathan Edwards, and it involves a secret identity, a cross-Atlantic conspiracy, and a demand for a 7-year obligation that, well, most of us would not last 7 days doing.
We're looking at a very specific portion of Edwards' writing today for this deep dive. It is the concluding considerations from a much larger work.
And that title is a mouthful.
Oh, it is massive.
Yeah.
The full title is A Humble Attempt to Promote Explicit Agreement and Visible Union of God's People in Extraordinary Prayer for the Revival of Religion and the Advancement of Christ's Kingdom on Earth.
Yeah, they really loved their long titles back then.
They sure did. But the core concept is highly practical. We are dealing with an actual historical proposal, often referred to as the Memorial, which was initiated in the autumn of 1744 by a group of ministers in Scotland.
To put you, the listener, in the right headspace, we really need to set the scene here. Imagine the year is 1746, which is when Edwards is publishing this response. You do not have a smartphone. News travels across the Atlantic Ocean at the speed of a wooden sailing ship.
Which means information is months old by the time you even read it.
Right, precisely. And across that ocean, a group of Scottish ministers prints a document. They essentially send a request to believers in the American colonies, asking them to join in a unified, strictly scheduled effort of prayer.
And our mission today is to look closely at the arguments Edwards uses to back up this Scottish request. We are going to unpack his rhetorical and theological defense of this transnational agreement.
Because he does not just say, hey, this is a good idea, he builds a fortress around it.
He really does. We will look at how he anticipates and disarms skeptics, why he defends the anonymity of the organizers, and the theological reasoning behind his demand for a 7-year timeline. We are moving past the surface level of the text to understand the psychological mechanisms and the theological framework Edwards employs to persuade his readers.
Okay, so let us open this up by looking at the economics of the ask. The Scottish ministers are asking the American church to join them in crying out to God to, as the text says, favor Zion. And Edwards leans heavily into the physical cost of this request.
And he points out that the cost is zero.
Zero.
Yeah, he is quite literal about this. He says they are not asking for silver or gold or any outward substance. He makes it clear that participating will not cause trouble, difficulty, or suffering in a person's outward interest.
Think about that. If you open your inbox right now or check your physical mail, you probably have an appeal from a charity or a political campaign.
Almost certainly.
Right. Usually an international appeal is a request for your wallet. They need funds to build a well, or support a missionary, or fund a legal defense. But Edwards highlights that these ministers just want your time and your voice.
The logical progression Edwards uses here corners the reader entirely. By establishing that the physical material cost is absolute zero, he removes the most common excuse people use to avoid participation.
Because you cannot say you cannot afford it.
Exactly. If an organizer asks you to donate $1,000 to a cause, you can look at your bank account and say you simply cannot afford it. That is a valid material excuse. But if the request requires $0, zero physical labor, and zero risk to your social standing, well, those material excuses evaporate.
You are just left standing naked with the request. You either want to participate or you do not want to participate. There is no middle ground.
And Edwards frames this not as a burden, but as a staggering opportunity. He says this zero-cost effort secures the greatest mercy in the world.
Let us define that phrase, the greatest mercy in the world. Because Edwards is not talking about winning a lottery or securing a good crop yield for the season.
No, not at all.
He outlines very specific things. This mercy entails the glory of the Lord, the advancement of our common happiness, and the well-being of our fellow creatures across all nations.
He takes the act of prayer, which many people view as a highly private, insulated ritual, going into your room to ask for personal blessings, and he elevates it to a global, world-altering necessity.
That is a massive shift in perspective.
It is. This connects directly to the Reformed understanding of God's providence. God is steering human history toward a specific end, and Edwards argues that the prayers of the saints are the ordained means by which God brings about that end.
So think about the person reading this in the 18th century. They are sitting in a farmhouse in New England, reading a pamphlet by candlelight, and Edwards is telling them that their prayers are the mechanism for the happiness of fellow creatures in nations they have never even visited.
It means they're being invited into a grand cosmic operation. Edwards points out that this is a mercy which the Word of God requires believers to pray for above all other mercies.
Above all others.
Yeah. He argues that providence itself, the specific way God is ordering world events at that very moment, loudly calls the people of God to pray. He goes so far as to say that ignoring this proposal or turning it away with little attention is actually a sin against God.
Wow, that is a sharp escalation.
It really is.
He moves from pointing out that the effort costs nothing to stating that ignoring the request is an act of rebellion.
He leaves no middle ground for apathy. He argues these Scottish ministers have acted as proper disciples of the Messiah by proposing this union. Therefore, to reject the proposal is to reject a direct call from God. The logic is that God uses the ordinary means of human proposals to initiate his divine plans.
Okay, but even if the cost is zero, and even if the goal is the greatest mercy in the world, people are naturally suspicious.
Sure.
Especially because these Scottish ministers did something highly unusual. They made this proposal anonymously.
Which brings us to a brilliant piece of defensive rhetoric from Edwards. He has to validate the character of men whose names he cannot even share.
Right here is where the skeptic in me throws up a major red flag.
I can see there.
Edwards describes these organizers as quiet, peaceable members of the Church of Scotland. He specifically notes they are not separatists or schismatics. But, I mean, if you get a flyer under your windshield wiper telling you to join a movement and there is no name attached to it, you are probably throwing it in the recycling bin.
Naturally.
Why should an 18th century farmer, or anyone today for that matter, trust organizers who refuse to put their signatures on the document?
Well, Edwards anticipates that exact skeptical response. He knows his audience is wary of anonymous demands. He addresses the objection head-on by saying, if any shall say they cannot judge their character but must take it on trust from others because they conceal their names, he has an answer. He argues that the anonymity is actually proof of their honest intention.
Wait, he calls it an excess of modesty, right?
Yes. He points out that human nature typically drives people to seek credit. When someone launches a massive international movement, they usually want to be seen as the visionary.
Right, they want the book deal, they want the speaking tour.
Exactly. They want to be known as the heads of a great affair or the first projectors of something extraordinary. Edwards suggests that by stripping their names away, these ministers are proving they have no ulterior motives.
They are essentially saying, do not look at us, look at the kingdom of Christ.
And the self-effacement was highly calculated.
Yeah.
It was not just them being polite. It was a tactical maneuver to neutralize the incredibly toxic partisan politics of the Scottish Church at the time.
Ah, the politics.
Right. Edwards stresses that the proposal was made with a prudent guard against anything that looks like superstition or anything that might entangle a tender conscience. The organizers explicitly stated they did not want anyone to think they were promoting a particular party or a specific denomination of Christians.
We probably need to define some of the language he uses here for the listener. He mentions the organizers are not schismatics or separatists. A schismatic is someone who creates a split or a faction within a church over secondary issues.
Yeah, drawing lines in the sand.
Edwards hints that they have lamented the late divisions and breaches of the Church of Scotland. So the church landscape over there was completely fractured. If a specific named minister proposed this prayer effort, people from a rival faction might reject the entire idea just out of spite.
Just because of the name attached to it. By remaining anonymous, they remove the partisan obstacle. Edwards highlights this modesty as a deliberate, charitable strategy. They wanted people of every theological leaning within the bounds of Orthodox Christianity to join in seeking the common interest of Christ's kingdom.
That is pretty smart, actually.
It is very pragmatic. To Edwards, refusing to participate simply because the authors are modest enough to hide their names is an illogical and cynical response.
But, you know, anonymity is not the only reason people might be skeptical. If you are reading this in 1746, you are living in the immediate aftermath of the Great Awakening.
And things got messy.
Very messy. Edwards addresses this, and it is an absolute masterstroke of logic. He pivots to address critics of what he calls the recent religious stirs.
This is perhaps the most fascinating argumentative trap Edwards sets in the entire text. He knows he is writing to an audience that includes people who are exhausted by the chaos of the revivals.
He acknowledges to the reader that there have been disorders, extravagancies, and delusions of the devil prevailing lately. He is admitting that the revivals brought wildness. There were people falling down, shouting, making bizarre claims of direct revelation.
He validates the skeptic's observation. He does not try to pretend the church is in a state of perfect peace.
Think about this in a modern context. If you are listening to this on your commute right now, think about the last time you saw a scandal or extreme behavior in an organization you cared about.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, and your instinct was probably to meet them on social media, cancel your donation, and walk away entirely. You see the loudest, most chaotic members doing something outrageous, and you say, if that is what this movement produces, I want no part of it.
It is the natural human reaction of guilt by association.
Yeah.
You see disorder, you assume the root of the movement is corrupt, and you abandon the field. But Edwards takes that natural instinct and turns it completely upside down.
He argues that if you truly believe the grand deceiver, the devil, is at work in these religious extravagancies, then that is the primary reason you must join this prayer effort.
He sets up a binary for the skeptic. The skeptic says, I see the devil causing chaos in the church, therefore I am leaving. Edwards counters with, I see the devil causing chaos in the church, therefore you must stay and pray.
It is brilliant.
He argues that the more delusions of the devil have prevailed, the more need we have to pray earnestly to God for his Holy Spirit.
It is like a doctor looking at a patient who is suddenly running a massive, dangerous fever. The skeptical family member looks at the sweating, delirious patient and says, the body is failing, let us abandon hope.
Give up.
Right. But Edwards is stepping in and saying, the fever means the immune system is finally waking up to fight a massive infection. The heat and the shaking are terrifying, but now is precisely the time to administer the medicine, not the time to leave the hospital.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it. He states that the Holy Spirit is the cure to this disorder. If you want true religion promoted in opposition to the grand deceiver, you must seek the Spirit.
And he makes a pretty aggressive claim about what happens next, does he not?
He does. He makes a bold claim about the result of this prayer. He says that the more this proposed prayer is answered, the more effectually will all that is contrary to sober and pure religion be extirpated and exploded.
Extirpated and exploded. Those are violent words.
They're entirely uncompromising. To extirpate means to pull up by the root,
Yeah.
to destroy completely.
Right.
Explode, in the context of the 18th century, means to drive out with violence and noise, to reject utterly. He is telling the skeptic, if you hate the disorder, prayer is the weapon that will annihilate that disorder.
He takes their excuse for apathy and turns it into an inescapable obligation. If you hate the delusions, you are required to pray against them.
Exactly.
So he removes the excuse of physical cost, he removes the excuse of anonymous organizers, he removes the excuse of messy, chaotic church dynamics. He systematically dismantles the logical roadblocks. Now he moves to the emotional core of his argument. He uses a visceral, real-world example from his day, shifting from the intellect to the heart.
He asks his audience to consider friends who are lately in captivity in Canada. And he asks a rhetorical question. He says, would not these captives have rejoiced to hear of anything that seemed to forebode the approach of their redemption?
Now, for us today, reading the phrase captivity in Canada might sound like being stuck in a snowy airport terminal in Toronto.
Right, a minor inconvenience.
But for Edward's original audience, this was a fresh, bleeding trauma. During the colonial conflicts, particularly King George's War, having friends, neighbors, or family members taken captive during raids by French and Native American forces and marched up to Canada was a terrifying reality.
People just vanished into the wilderness.
Families were torn apart, not knowing if their loved ones were dead or enslaved.
It was a collective psychological wound for the New England colonies. By bringing this up, Edwards grounds his high-minded theological discourse in raw human empathy. He is asking the reader to tap into a specific, recognizable feeling of dread and the contrasting feeling of desperate hope.
He connects this historical terror to a theological reality. He asks the reader if they favor the dust of Zion.
We should unpack that phrase for a second. Zion, in this context, is the Protestant shorthand for the global universal church. To favor the dust of Zion is a reference to Psalm 102, where the servants of God take pity on the ruined stones and dust of Jerusalem.
So Edwards is asking his readers, do you care for the church even when it looks like rubble?
Yes. Do you make the church's interest your own? Do you prefer Jerusalem above your chief joy?
And if the reader answers yes, Edwards springs the emotional trap.
He points out that if you truly love the church, you should react to this Scottish call for prayer with the same emotional intensity that a captive's family feels when they hear rumors of a rescue mission.
Oh, wow.
He says, "Would not our friends have rejoiced to have heard of anything that seemed to forebode the approach of their redemption?"
So the Scottish Memorial is that rumor of a rescue mission.
That is the parallel he is drawing. If you see the church in a ruined state, full of divisions and attacks on the grand deceiver, and then you hear that God is stirring up believers across the ocean to unite in extraordinary prayer, you should be thrilled. You should view it as a promising token in a dark day.
It should be natural to rejoice at this hopeful token of the redemption of Zion. So we have established the logic, and we have established the emotional fire. Now, my practical brain kicks in. How did Edwards expect people to execute this massive, coordinated effort across different continents? We are talking about an era with no digital communication, no mass transit, and highly isolated communities.
Well, Edwards outlines the practical application. The goal is for believers to unite with one heart and voice and to go speedily. He suggests forming praying societies that meet during quarterly seasons.
So 4 times a year, you gather your local community specifically for this purpose.
But he is also intensely realistic about the limitations of his audience. He gives a specific instruction that stands out in the text: there is no need that one should wait for another.
So if you cannot get your neighbors to join you, if you cannot form a convenient quarterly society, do not use that as an excuse to neglect the duty.
Correct. He says, do it by yourself. Unite in heart
Yeah.
and practice as far as you are able with those in distant places.
I love that. He is validating private participation in a corporate event.
He is. Even if you are sitting alone in your room in Massachusetts, your heart and practice are unified with a believer sitting in Edinburgh. That conceptual unity was highly significant to Edwards. He believed the spiritual reality of the union superseded the physical isolation of the participants.
Still, getting the word out and organizing these societies, even informal ones, takes leadership. Edwards places a very specific burden on the clergy here. He focuses on his peers.
He argues that ministers have a special duty in this affair.
Why ministers specifically? I mean, aside from the obvious reality that it is their job to lead spiritual initiatives?
Edwards points to two practical realities of 18th century networking. First, ministers are by office the overseers of whole congregations. They have a captive audience every single Sunday.
They are the designated guides in matters of religion, so their endorsement carries immediate localized weight.
Yes. And second, and this is crucial for the era, ministers ordinarily have a far more extensive acquaintance and influence abroad than private Christians.
They were the communication nodes in the social network.
Exactly. In an era where a letter could take months to cross the ocean, a private farmer in Connecticut might only correspond with his immediate family in the next town. But his minister was likely writing theological letters to other ministers in Boston who were corresponding with ministers in London and Scotland.
So the clergy formed a transatlantic intellectual web.
Edwards is mobilizing a grassroots movement, telling the private Christian not to wait for anyone, while simultaneously leaning heavily on the institutional reach of church leaders to disseminate the plan. It is a top-down and bottom-up strategy all at once.
It is a highly effective model for spreading an idea before mass media. The ministers create the awareness and the framework by preaching on the memorial, and the individual believers provide the engine by executing the prayer in their private homes and quarterly societies.
And it works.
But getting started is one thing. You read the pamphlet, you agree with the logic, you feel the emotional pull, you talk to your minister, and you begin praying. Here is where we hit the most staggering part of this entire document. The timeline Edwards proposes leads into the final and, frankly, the most demanding aspect of the text.
The Scottish Memorial proposes that this united prayer continue for 7 years.
7 years, starting in November 1746. I have to be honest with you, keeping a personal habit for 7 weeks is tough.
Very tough.
If I decide to drink more water or read 10 pages a day, I am struggling by week 4. If my pastor asked me to commit to a daily, synchronized task for 7 years, I would politely find the exit. That sounds less like a spiritual practice and more like an impossible legalistic burden. How does he justify that kind of psychological marathon?
This brings us to Edwards' theology of waiting, which is incredibly challenging to modern sensibilities. He stresses the scriptural precept of praying and not fainting. He warns his readers up front, do not be disheartened if you pray for years and nothing remarkable appears to happen.
He actually says it would be very unbecoming for believers to grow dull and slack just because the desired mercy has not shown up yet.
He goes further than just telling people to be patient. He unpacks the way God operates in providence. Edwards states that God is often to try the faith and patience of his people when they are crying out for a vast mercy. God will deliberately withhold the mercy for a season.
And he adds a detail that is brutal to human psychology. He says God might not only withhold the mercy, but at first, he might cause an increase of dark appearances.
Let us pause on that concept for a second.
Right.
And an increase of dark appearances.
It means things are going to get worse before they get better. You start praying for revival, you start praying for unity and light, and the immediate result might be that the world gets darker. The divisions in the church might get worse. The chaos in society might amplify.
Human nature looks at that regression and says, the strategy is failing. In fact, the prayer is making things worse, so we should abandon the effort. But Edwards frames this dark period as a deliberate trial of faith. It is a theological mechanism similar to a refiner's fire.
Breaking down the impurities.
Yes. Edwards believed human pride had to be completely broken by apparent failure before divine success could be granted. He sets up a tension between the human capacity for waiting and the magnitude of what they are asking for. He calls human patience short-winded.
Short-winded faith. That is an insult that lands right on the chin.
He asks his reader, is it not a poor business if our faith is so short-winded that we cannot wait 7 years, taking this little bit of pain to seek a mercy that is infinitely vast?
He is contrasting the tiny physical effort of praying a few times a day, meeting quarterly, with the infinite scale of the reward, a global revival of religion, and the advancement of Christ's kingdom. He is essentially saying, you want an infinite return on investment, but you are not willing to lock your capital away for even 7 years.
That brings the economic analogy full circle. The initial cost is low, but the maturity date on the bond is incredibly long. And Edwards actually hopes the effort will extend beyond the initial 7 years.
Oh, yeah. He says he sincerely wishes that when the 7 years are up, it will not be the end. He hopes a new agreement will be entered into with greater engagedness and more abundant alacrity. He wants them to double down after the first 7 years expire.
Because he believes the act of praying together will fuse the global church together, regardless of the immediate outward results. The practice itself is part of the answer. But to anchor this massive demand, he does not just rely on logic or theological theory. He closes his argument with a rapid-fire sequence of scripture citations.
He hits the reader with Psalms, Habakkuk, Micah, and Isaiah. Let us look at these verses because they all hammer the exact same theme. Psalm 27, verse 14. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage. Wait, I say, on the Lord.
Habakkuk chapter 2. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry.
Micah chapter 7. I will look unto the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation.
And Isaiah chapter 25, where the people finally see the result and say, lo, this is our God, we have waited for him, and he will save us.
The recurring theme is inescapable. Waiting. Trusting that the timeline is not in human hands. Edwards explicitly tells his readers they must be content to be ignorant of the times and seasons. God will fulfill his promises in his own time.
This requires a massive surrender of control. You have to participate in the action, the prayer, while entirely relinquishing the schedule of the results. You do the work, and you let God determine the calendar.
So let us recap the scope of what we have just unpacked. Edwards took a simple, anonymous request from a group of Scottish ministers, and he built a watertight case for an international, multi-year effort. He showed that the physical cost was nothing, but the potential reward was infinite.
He defended the organizers' modesty to keep the focus entirely on Christ and off human ego.
He turned the skeptic's fear of chaotic religious stirs into the primary motivation to seek the Holy Spirit's order.
He used the visceral terror of the Canada captives to ignite a desperate hope for the church's rescue. He laid out practical steps for individuals and leaders to unite without waiting for perfect conditions.
And finally, he set a grueling 7-year expectation, demanding that believers trust God's timing, even if the world grows darker in the meantime.
It is a towering piece of persuasive writing. And it leaves us with a provocative thought to mull over today.
If you are listening right now, consider your own context. We live in an era of instant gratification and rapid communication. We expect immediate replies to our text messages. We demand quick fixes to massive global issues.
If a problem is identified on a Monday, we want legislation or a technological solution rolled out by Friday.
Right. What would it look like to adopt Edwards' mindset? Imagine dedicating yourself to a collective effort for the good of others, fully expecting the situation to look darker at first, and agreeing in advance that you will not even evaluate the outward results for 7 full years.
That flies in the face of everything our modern culture values.
We want the clean X-ray. We want to see the broken bone, fix it, and move on immediately.
But Edwards invites us into the murky waters. He asks us to sit in the dark, to pray constantly, and to wait for a dawn we cannot yet see.
It changes how you view the waiting room, does it not? It is not just empty time. The waiting is the work itself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive of Reformed thinking. Keep analyzing the text, keep waiting in the dark, and we will see you next time.